Okay, welcome everyone. It is day 2 of the Hot Springs Book Festival, and we have a lot of exciting events left before the weekend is over. I'll move forward ahead in time just a little bit. Tomorrow, we are going to have 3 very special events. So in the morning here at the library, you might invite your children and grandchildren to see Cora Bell Schaffner do her book talk and sign in, and I see her right there in the front row. Hello, Cora Bell. And she had some wonderful school visits the other day, and there's some wonderful pictures from that. So she's had a great time. Following Cora Bell, there's going to be Ayanna Gray. She's a young adult author. She's also going to be here at the library. And both of these events still have some openings left. And then finally, in the afternoon, we're going to have a very special guest, and that is the one and only Elizabeth Eckford. And if you don't know her name, you might recognize her from this iconic image. She's one of the Little Rock Nine, and she's going to be speaking over at the auditorium of the Main Street Visual Performing Arts Magnet School. It's quite a mouthful, but it's going to be a wonderful event, and there's no registration required for that one. They have a large auditorium, so hope to see you there. And now, who went to the event last night at the Vapors to see David Hill? A lot of you. Did you have a good time? Well, Biddy has told me that he's a tough act to follow, and and he did an amazing job. But I'm going to introduce Biddy very briefly, because if anyone can follow Dave Hill, it's going to be Biddy. This is the first book since the Vapors came out about 2 years ago that is about Hot Springs, where I've seen so much buzz and interest just looking at the crowd in this room, and I know we have a lot of people watching online. So congratulations, Biddy, on your upcoming book. And the other, And the other reason I'm going to keep my introduction for Biddy very short is because she has too big of a resume to remember everything. She's done a couple of programs or been involved with them here in the past at the library. She's the vice president of the Garland County Historical Society, and I tried reading off her resume at that, and she is such a humble and pleasant person. She cut me off in the middle of it and wanted me to stop. So I'm going to cut myself off right now and introduce Biddy Martin.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you all for coming. This is just a great night, and I'm very honored to be here tonight. Last year, I was so excited when I heard about the Hot Springs Book Festival. I've been to them in New York and LA, and I always wish we had one here, and now we do. And that is, I'll wait for Paul to get the slide up there. There we go. Thanks to the Garland County Library, the Literary Council of Garland County, and the National Park College Adult Education. We wouldn't be here if it wasn't for them. And I want to say again that it was such a great night last night with David Hill. It was spectacular. I've had a long association with the library. I loved it when Mother took us to the children's department. And then later we graduated to the other side of the building. And then after college, I'd go upstairs and watch movies in that great old building over there on Woodbine. Remember the library over there?
Yeah.
I'll never forget that magical library. And I'll never forget the librarian, Gordon L. Williams, who's the namesake of this library. There's her, see her there on the wall, Gordon L. Y'all remember her, I'm sure. As much time as I spent at the old library, I've surpassed it at the new one. Since 2014, I've been here hours on end performing research and also attending meetings at the Hot Springs Writers Group. I love our library, and I think it's the best in the country, don't y'all? Before we get started, I want you to know that my book will be coming out May 15th, and it wouldn't have been possible without the help of so many people and organizations. They are the Garland County Historical Society, the Hot Springs Writers Group, my agent, Linda Connor, my acquisitions editor, Jake Bonar, my publisher, Roman and Littlefield, the production editor, Nicole Carty, publicist, Jess Kastner, my writing mentor, Bonnie Hearn Hill and Jan Mines, and everyone that's listed in the back of the book. A lot of y'all are in there. Here's a cover of my book. This is just a mock-up because it was just printed. And I had Bill Hall printed this up for me to put on this book. But on the back cover, it says, Hot Springs, Arkansas was shaken to its core in 1966 after a girl was found dead on a ranch outside of town. I'm going to wait for Paul to get to that slide. There we are. Thank you, Paul. The owner claimed it was an accident, but people had their doubts. He may have gotten away with murder until he killed again. Right below it is a review from Bill Clinton, who said, Snake Eyes is a gripping true crime tale well told. The story of a nice young girl lost far too soon and those determined to find the truth and get it out. It happened in the author's hometown and mine and played out against its culture of denial and decency, crassness and caring. There's a lot of real life here. Read it. Thank you. The girl they're talking about was our friend, Kathy Ward. We never really knew what happened to her, and we still didn't in 2014 when I called my childhood friend, Leslie. I was calling to tell her that I would be home from New York for 2 weeks, and while I was there, I wanted to come to the library, and I wanted to do some research and find Kathy's obituary or something. Leslie said she wanted to go with me, and then she told me a secret she kept since Kathy's death. The day after I arrived home, Leslie and I went to the library. We didn't know the date Kathy died, but we knew it was sometime during junior high school. So we asked for microfilm for years during that time. I felt surely with both of us looking, we'd find something, but we had no luck. 2 days later, I went back to the library with information I'd found online about the man we suspected had killed Kathy. This time I knew it was going to be a sure thing, but nope, nothing. I was frustrated, and I talked to Greg at the resource desk, and that's him way back there in the back. There's Greg. He suggested that I should go to the Historical Society. He told me they had funeral home records over there. So I rushed over to Quapaw to the Historical Society, and I asked them if they could find something about Kathy in their files. A volunteer said he'd go look, and a few minutes later, he came back with two pieces of paper, and he laid them on the table. He pointed at one of them that he had highlighted. He said, "Look right here, Catherine Ann Ward. She died on June 24th, 1966, and her father was Dr. Hiram Ward." Then he showed me the other piece of paper, and he said, "She's buried in Murfreesboro." I was so excited, and I couldn't thank him enough. So I'd hit pay dirt, so I rushed back over to the library, and I asked Greg for the June 24th, 1966 microfilm. I loaded it on the machine, and I sped it up to June 24th, nothing. That whole day was missing. I wound it backwards, I went forwards, I looked, nothing. Kathy wasn't anywhere in the newspaper. I was really disappointed, but I realized that at least now I knew when she had died. 2 days later, I connected Leslie's secret to a mysterious event that happened on the 48th anniversary of Kathy's death, and I took that as my sign to start digging up this story. That's why I'm wearing this skateboard necklace, and so is Leslie. And I know that tonight, Kathy is standing right here beside me. 3 days after Kathy's discovery, I was fortunate to interview her father, and I was feeling a bit anxious about driving while I was driving up to Murfreesboro. I didn't know what to expect. Dr. Ward was 89 years old at the time, and he was still caring for patients at the Murfreesboro Hospital. Because of my healthcare experience, I knew he could be either abrupt or accommodating. Thankfully, he was the latter. He gave me all the family background and his feelings of Kathy's short life. After Dr. Ward told me all he could remember, I interviewed his third wife, who, I have to tell you, was one of the many coincidences I found while I was working on this book. At first, when they started happening, I thought it was very interesting. But when they started adding up, I thought this could only happen in Hot Springs. Dr. Ward told me where Kathy was buried in Murfreesboro, and before I headed home, I decided to drive down to the town square, and I went to the cemetery that was nearby. I saw the huge Ward family monument, and then I found Kathy's grave 2 rows away. I was sad.
Can
Yes, sir.
you please tell me when the transition, since I can't see the.
Oh, yeah, I'll do like Ron Fuller.
Perfect.
I'll go like Ron does this one. Okay, so we got to, yeah, we're way on path.
I figured.
Yeah, there's Dr. Ward. So one more, Murfreesboro Cemetery. There, okay, one more. Oh, there's the Ward's family monument, and now Kathy's headstone.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I was sad when I saw Kathy's headstone, not only because she'd been gone for so long, but because it didn't look like a little girl's grave. I think I'll do this. I think I'll just pause that better. She's not listening. Kathy Ward's family moved to Hot Springs in the early 60s, and soon her mother bought a home on Prospect Avenue. Although I never knew it back then, Kathy had arrived without a father and was experiencing a childhood unlike any of us. I'm sure it was hard for her to fit in with us kids who'd lived in Hot Springs all of our lives and had a father every night at the supper table. We didn't know her secret struggles, nor that she would become the girl who died at Blacksnake Ranch. Kathy went to school with us at Jones, where 4 generations of my family attended, but Kathy only had one, hers. Everyone loved the Jones School Bell House. A scene in chapter 4 involved Kathy playing in the bell house with some older girls. After her death, one of them read her story in the newspaper and was convinced that a few weeks earlier, the ranch owner was the same creepy man who had been in her Oaklawn neighborhood claiming to have found a lost puppy. But there's more to that story, and it's in the book. Jones School was known for its operettas. They were always elaborate productions and a very big deal. Here's Kathy in her 5th grade operetta. I thought I had circled her, but I guess I didn't. That's her on the back row up there, right below that paper tree. She has the long hair. She's like Mr. Robinson, and I can't remember the lady there, but Kathy's 1, 2, 3. Can you see her there on the top right? Okay, that's Kathy. That same year, Kathy's teacher became sick, and her substitute was my neighbor, Mary Sue Tracy. She's second from the left in the blue pantsuit. And there's Terry's mother. Terry's on the front row. There's Miss Dotson, 1, 2, 3 in. Okay. Miss Tracy's daughter, Leslie, was the same age as Kathy, and this is Leslie with her father, Ernest Tracy. Mitzi and I lived across the street from the Tracys on the corner of Summer and Garland. And you can see can you go back to this thing? You can see the Tracy's house over there in the background. Leslie and Kathy were a year younger and a grade behind us at Jones School, but that didn't matter because we were all friends just the same. But now, I want to get back to Miss Tracy and I want to read an excerpt from the book. This is called a galley. This is what they send you to read the proofs before the book actually comes out in hardback. And I want to read you all something about Miss Tracy and Kathy. During grade school, Mary Sue Tracy walked into her classroom and announced, can you all hear me? Okay. And announced she was replacing the regular teacher. She's taking an extended sick leave, so to help me get to know you, I'd like you to write something about yourself, she said. Kathy sat at her desk, laboring over her paper, just like the other students, but none moved Mary Sue like hers. My father is a doctor, but my parents are divorced and I miss him. I like it here now that I'm making friends, but I don't like being here, she told her new teacher what she wouldn't tell her friends. Mary Sue was amazed as she read Kathy's story and wondered how someone that young could write with such feelings. But from the standpoint of a mother's view, she was sad. After class was over, she slipped Kathy's paper into her purse, took it home, and then tucked it away in her bedroom drawer, maybe planning to give it to Kathy's mother so that she could get her daughter some help. She also decided to introduce Kathy to her daughter Leslie. The two girls were in different homerooms but were the same age and lived a few blocks apart. They became fast friends and visited at each other's homes despite being extreme opposites. Kathy was tall, dark, a bit clumsy, and unsure of herself, while Leslie was short, blonde, and known as the fastest runner in their grade at Jones School. When Kathy came to Leslie's house, she would first sit and talk with Mary Sue. Leslie knew their unusual bond resulted from their time in the classroom. She was always patient and stayed in her bedroom until Kathy and her mother were finished visiting. Leslie wasn't jealous or threatened by their closeness. In fact, she was glad because she knew they would talk whenever Kathy became sad, which she thought happened every time Kathy started missing her father. Kathy was born a year after her father completed medical school. He was from Murfreesboro, and that's where he wanted to start his practice. You can imagine Kathy was a little princess in the rural town where being a physician's family was like being royalty. Sarah Ward was attractive and enjoyed Hot Springs nightlife with many dates. Hot Springs was probably enticing to the 38-year-old who may have thought a town with bookies and brothels would be more accepting of a single mother, which was taboo in the polite Southern society of the 60s. Sarah Ward strived to attain a social status with her lovely home and her involvement at the Fine Arts Center. She's the pretty woman on the left in the dark dress in this May 1964 newspaper photo. Kathy had to be feeling better about life by the 6th grade. She'd gone from the back row of the chorus to the front row in her 6th grade operetta. This is her right here on the front row. She's the tallest of the Chinese girl dancers. And right beside her is her buddy, Betty Jo Tucker. Oh, I'm sorry. Back one, thank you. Kathy was blossoming as she grew taller. Her girlfriends were in awe of her olive complexion, her dark hair, and brown eyes. They were drawn to her and they wanted to sit beside her at school or in scouts, not only for her beauty, but because she was also kind and sweet. They didn't know her shyness was possibly a shield for her sadness. Kathy entered Central Junior High School in the fall of 1965. Unlike her friends who aspired to be cheerleaders, Kathy joined the band. She'd been a member of a junior high prep band at Jones School, and she also took piano lessons. One of her brother's memories of her was when they played piano together at their home. Kathy was attracting a lot of attention from the boys at Central Junior High School. You'll read about the boys' crushes in the third chapter and how two of them were affected by her tragedy, but they weren't alone. Kathy had many interests in addition to the band. She would walk a few blocks down to Leslie's house to go skateboarding. It was perfect for the two seventh graders who became surfer girls every time they took a ride down the Garland Street Hill. Leslie invited Kathy over to skateboard on Sunday, June 19th, 1966. It was Father's Day, and probably a difficult one for Kathy, who missed her father so much. As usual, when she arrived, she first visited with Miss Tracy, and then she and Leslie went outside and they went skateboarding. They both turned 13, and in between their runs downhill, they talked about boys. Kathy told Leslie someone had been calling her, and then she confided that she had a new boyfriend, Mike Langley, the tall, handsome quarterback at Southwest Junior High. In a phone interview, he told me their budding romance was revolutionary back then because they went to different schools. They were one of the first junior high cross-town couples in 1966. Kathy and Leslie had fun that Sunday afternoon, but Kathy was in a rush to get home, maybe to talk to her new boyfriend. Whatever the reason, she was in such a hurry, she forgot her skateboard. Leslie called her that night. She told her that she'd hidden it in her side bushes out in the yard and told Kathy to come over that week to get it because she was going to church camp that week with the twins, Mitzi and me. Leslie and Kathy made plans to go skateboarding when she got home from camp. But that night, Leslie didn't know she was talking to Kathy for the very last time, nor did she realize that Kathy's childhood skateboard would become a lifelong secret. Kathy had overcome the challenges of her childhood. She made good grades, earning letters of commendation. The newspaper would run a list every 6 weeks of the honor row and those who had earned letters of commendations. Kathy's is down there on the bottom. Well, it was down there on the bottom where I yelled at it. And mine was up above it, underlined, just like I did it back then. Kathy made new friends in the band, but she kept her inner circle from the 5th grade, which included Betty Jo Tucker and others like Leslie. Betty Jo and Kathy had been side by side in this 5th grade class photo. Everything was going Kathy's way except her wish to go horseback riding. Her mother would never give her permission to go to Blacksnake Ranch, and for some reason, 3 weeks after she finished the 7th grade, Sarah Ward gave in, and she even took Kathy on a special buying spree to Oaklawn Sportswear and bought her some jodhpurs and some tall riding boots. Now Kathy's life was turning into a fairy tale. She had a new boyfriend. She had a new riding outfit. and she was going horseback riding with her friends on June 24th, 1966 at Blacksnake Ranch. Her boyfriend told me in a phone interview that he had been at her house a few days before she was going horseback riding. He said, "I remember how excited she was. I remember hoping she wasn't going to go because I wanted to do something together that day." He later explained that he had football practice all the time, but he had that one day open and he wanted to spend it with her. Mitzi, Leslie, and I were coming home from church camp on Friday afternoon, June 24th, 1966. The three of us were sitting in the back seat of Miss Letha's Rambler coming down the Grand Avenue hill. When you go down the hill, you can either turn left and go to our house on Summer Street or go right and go to Kathy's on Prospect. As we were going down the hill, I saw Kathy and I hollered at her and I waved at her. Then Leslie saw her and she waved and hollered at her too, but Kathy never looked our way. She had her head down and she looked very determined to get home. Missy, Leslie, and I have never forgotten that memory, never. But how did we see her that day if she was out at Blacksnake Ranch? That night, a frightening story of Kathy's death swept through the Y-team, the junior high Y-team dance. Everyone was stunned and they couldn't believe it. Some of them even wanted proof and they called her house to see if she was at home. They didn't know their parents had already heard about Kathy's tragedy. I'm sure Miss Tracy was upset, and just like us kids, I'm sure she hoped it wasn't true. However, the next morning, Kathy's death was confirmed on the front page of the newspaper. It said, "Catherine N. Ward, 13, daughter of Sarah Ward of 1003 Prospect Avenue, was killed Friday in an accident in the Davis Ranch on Blacksnake Road. The girl was apparently dragged to death by a horse she was riding when her foot caught in a stirrup." Alan Frank Davis, owner of the ranch, which specializes in horse rentals, pursued the running horse but was unable to catch it before the girl was killed. The article went on to say that Dr. William Mashburn, the county coroner, would file an official report after an investigation. The article explained the sheriff's department had been called about the accident at 3:48 p.m. Some of the people I interviewed said they remembered that Kathy was missing out at the ranch, but they were sending out a search party to find her. Yet the newspaper reported that Frank Davis had pursued Kathy's runaway horse and couldn't catch it before she died. I tend to believe one of my sources who said Kathy's mother received a phone call that she was missing at the ranch. They thought she was lost on a trail and they'd find her. So which version of Kathy's death do we believe? Frank Davis's cover-up about a runaway horse, or the story about Kathy missing on the ranch? I didn't include the scenario in my book because it's based on hearsay and it couldn't be validated. The newspaper's front page story about Kathy's fatal accident also served as her obituary. It listed her extended family from Hot Springs, Murfreesboro, and El Dorado, and said her funeral would be held that day at 1:30 p.m. at St. Luke's Episcopal Church. Burial would follow in Murfreesboro. That meant Kathy's funeral was held less than 24 hours after she died. So who had time to grieve? Okay, one more. Okay. This is a photo of Kathy's classmates who were in the student council after she died. Now you have to understand that most of us kids didn't read the newspaper in 1966. We operated on the need-to-know system from our parents, and most of them weren't talking to us. But they talked among themselves, and many began pointing fingers at Frank Davis. They didn't believe the story he told the deputies. Some of them knew he was a skilled horseman and could catch a runaway horse. Others knew he had a fast reputation. One of the skeptical parents was James Tucker. His daughter was Betty Jo. She and Kathy had been best friends since the 5th grade. That Friday night, Mr. Tucker received a phone call from his cousin who worked for Dr. Ward in Murfreesboro. She knew Betty Jo and Kathy were best friends, and she wanted to tell him what had happened to Kathy. That same week, Mr. Tucker had to contend with Betty Jo begging him to go horseback riding with Kathy and the other girls at Blacksnake Ranch. As much as he loved his only child, he wouldn't give her permission to go because he knew Frank Davis. Betty Jo pleaded with her father, telling him she wanted to go with her friends. She didn't want to be left out. But he stood firm and said, "No, I know him. You will not." After the disturbing call from his cousin, Mr. Tucker went to Betty Jo's bedroom and gave her the sad news. Of course, her world was turned upside down. Although she wasn't there with Kathy when she died, I think Betty Jo suffered survivor's guilt. She's always felt that if she'd been there, Kathy would still be alive today. Frank Davis was 42 years old and married to his 22-year-old fourth wife. They had 2 young sons, a toddler and an infant. He was a family man now. 10 years earlier, Frank would go honky-tonking with his buddies at old joints like Club 88 in Twin Oaks. Harold Tankersley was a friend of Frank's, and Harold said, Frank would get fighting drunk after 2 drinks and go into a rage when he got mad. It made no difference what he was mad at. He'd try to kill it up or tear it up. He was high-tempered. Frank was the type of guy that if he didn't like you, he didn't like you. But he was always good to me, and he even let me ride his rodeo horse. His mama, Irene, financed 25 to 50 horses stabled all over Garland County. Frank's second and third wives both left him, so he was determined to make a go of his 4th marriage. His mother always protected him from the law and stood by him through his multiple marriages. But she couldn't say anything because by 1966, she was married to her 3rd husband. Frank used his mother like an ATM machine. His friends out in the county thought he'd finally gotten himself straightened up when she bought him Blacksnake Ranch. His friend Harold said, Frank had lots of kids coming out, paying to ride horses. He'd changed quite a bit, and things finally seemed to be going his way before the girl died at his ranch. Harold's niece, Margie Hill, also knew Frank Davis. She said, we heard a little black boy drowned at Blacksnake Ranch, and his drowning may have been because of him seeing what actually happened to that girl, that she was already dead when she was connected to the saddle. Harold claimed they found the boy where they found the little girl. He said, it was a very sad time for us that he had gone that far. It made us stay away from him and not get involved in anything he was doing. Frank's business dried up faster than this wishing well in his front yard, and it's still there. He was down in the dumps and not a happy-go-lucky cowboy he once was around the teenage boys who were his ranch hands. Frank's emerging paranoia and erratic behavior troubled his mother and wife. They wanted him to go to Lackland Air Force Base to see a doctor down there. Frank had served as a flight officer in World War II, but was released in 1945 because of stomach issues. He was later a crop duster and a U.S. cattle inspector thanks to his war service and his college degree in agriculture. Back in 1954, Frank had been placed under a 30-day psychiatric evaluation by the hospital chief at the Army Navy Hospital. On its completion, the doctor told Frank that his stomach issues might be coming from his head. Now, in the summer of 1966, Frank was off to Texas to see another doctor, but this time his prognosis was different. Frank claimed the doctor said he didn't need a psychiatrist, he only needed to take care of his stomach. Frank was active in the rodeo club. This isn't him in the photo, but he did ride in the county parade and fair parade and the rodeos. It was an important part of his life. He also played guitar in the rodeo club's group, but later felt they double-crossed him. Frank was a daredevil in the saddle. He loved to jump off a rocky cliff atop his horse into a deep pool of water in the Bull Bayou Creek that skirted his property. That's what makes it so hard to believe the story he told the deputies about not being able to catch up a runaway horse. When we started the new school year on September 6, 1966, no one was talking about Kathy's tragedy that summer, not our teachers, nor our parents. Meanwhile, rumors of rape and murder swirled around the hallways of Central Junior High School. The stories were scary and they seeped out into the other public schools. Even the grade schoolers were talking about Kathy and at Blacksnake Ranch. I'm sure the band was sad when Kathy didn't walk into the band room that fall. I was told she was the prettiest and sweetest girl in the band. Their director, Mr. Smith, decided to play a special song for her at the school assembly, and he chose "The Shadow of Your Smile." That's Leslie and me in her bedroom. Our talks about school and friends were now tinged with fright. We were just like our schoolmates who'd never lost a friend in such a horrifying way. We didn't know back then that it would touch us like a high water mark after a flood, and it would last a lifetime. Frank's life had imploded by the fall of '66, and the worse it became, the more his mother pampered him, shelling out unbelievable amounts on her son's compulsions. This is his mother's home on Henderson Street. She inherited it from her second husband, and it'll play into the story later in the book. In years past, Frank would chase girls at Bob's Drive-In on Central Avenue. He liked them young, but now he was going to the clubs and closing them down every night. See, something happened only 46 days after Kathy's death that threw him into a tailspin. His mother was busy running her hair salon. It was only a few doors away from her second husband's business, Sam's Barbecue, that's on the corner. It's on the corner of Central and Avenue where Rocky's Pizza is now. Irene Davis overlooked her son's tantrums while her staff and neighbors observed his bizarre behavior. Frank was about to explode. He always had to have his way, and when he couldn't get it, he relied on his mother to make things happen. But this time she couldn't, and it all came to a head one winter evening at the Redbird Laundromat when Frank committed a murder in cold blood. Hot Springs has kept Frank Davis's murder tale spinning since the 60s. They're relics of our past that have endured the years, just like this old Ford that still sits on the backside of Blacksnake Ranch. Frank Davis would become the most feared and hated man in Hot Springs while he was making headlines. Many are still afraid, they're afraid of him. In fact, some wouldn't give me an interview because they feared he was still alive. That's how scary he was then, and his legend still lives on today. A blurb on the back cover says, quirky, well-drawn characters, and an iconic Southern setting. Martin's compelling true story reads like a mystery novel. Of course, the California author who said quirky characters was referring to Frank Davis. You won't believe the wild stories about him in the book. He was crazy, and so were some of his friends, this one especially. And you'll read this letter that he wrote him. It's in the book. It's crazy, and that's all I'm going to tell you. In 2015, Leslie, Mitzi, and I went to Kathy's grave on the anniversary of her death, and it was the first time we'd taken Kathy's skateboard. We wanted to get pictures holding it and standing beside her headstone. Before we left the cemetery, we looked at the photos and we were spooked. See how the pixels are distorted? They started at the headstone and swept up beside Leslie as if someone was standing beside her. Something else happened that day, and it's all in the book. Every year, we always know where we'll be on June 24th. It's become an annual event, like a holiday. Not even COVID could keep us from visiting Kathy's grave. It's become so important to Leslie and me that it would be very traumatic for us if we couldn't take the skateboard and some flowers to see Kathy on June 24th. This is Leslie saying goodbye to Kathy in 2021. It was a happy time for us. I'd endured all the ups and downs of writing the book, and the manuscript had gone to the publisher. It would be in print on our next visit in 2022. The story you've heard barely skims the surface of the book, and the majority of the pictures you've seen are not in the book. That's a complete different set of pictures. When I gave a presentation in March, a lady said, "You didn't tell us what happened to Frank." And I said, "You're right. That's all in the book." I have to admit that writing this book has been the hardest thing I've ever done. I used to think it was my college degree in business, and then I thought it was my nursing degree. But the work on this book equaled the same amount of time of those both degrees together. Okay. I always dabbled in writing, and when Designing Women became a hit back in 1986, I thought it would be fun to write a television script. And then I moved on to books. By happenstance, I ran and across the path of a Little Rock woman who had been accused of murdering her husband, who I knew grew up here in Hot Springs. I pursued that story with a writing partner, and we spent 3 years and 2 murder trials on that high-profile case. The first trial was a hung jury, and the second was an acquittal. It was a juicy story with lots of media coverage and great sound bites. My writing partner and I completed the book, and we had a movie offer, but that ended in a stalemate because of a contract timeline. While I was working on that book, I was living in Little Rock, of course, I walked outside my front yard one morning to pick up the newspaper, and I saw this huge axe stuck in a tree, and I knew somebody was trying to send me a message, but I just took that. I didn't let it bother me. I just took the axe and kept it. In 2000, I don't know if you can see that very well. In 2016, I attended a writers' conference in San Miguel, Mexico, where I was part of a small group that met with Gail Sheehy, who was famous for her 1974 book, Passages. Can you see her right down there in the middle with the sunglasses on? You can barely see her. She asked about our projects, and when I told her about mine, she said, "People will be interested in your story, but they'll be more interested in why you wrote it." I've always known that Kathy Ward has been writing tandem with many of us since her death. How can you forget your 13-year-old friend dying so tragically? And how can you live your entire life without knowing if it was an accident or a homicide? But the true why for me writing this book was the mysterious reappearance of Kathy's skateboard on the 48th anniversary of her death. That was my proof she wanted her story told. When I began working on the book, I was still employed full-time as a traveling operating room nurse. So I'd research and grab interviews whenever I was home between gigs on either coast. In the winter of 2017, I was out in California where I knew Kathy's brother lived. And on a whim, I decided to Google his name and a number popped up. So I called it and it was him. And he said, sure, I could come down to his house for an interview. He reminded me of his father, and in talking with him, I know that if Kathy had lived, she would have been just as smart and successful as her brother. I was blessed with good luck like this all through the book. It was as if someone was opening doors for me. Amazing gems would appear out of nowhere, and I was putting them all in the book right up until it went to the publisher. A surprising interview was arranged by Renee Lambert Lucy, a past president of the Historical Society. She connected me to Frank Davis's son, who doesn't live in Arkansas, but was here on a visit. When I called him, he agreed to an interview in my home. When he and his wife arrived, I knew they were just as leery of me as I was of them. And I think he was curious about my intent. But after I explained my connection to Kathy, I think his skepticism ended. He brought his father's homemade briefcase, and it was stuffed with personal items that had been given to him by a half-sibling who didn't want it any longer. They both detested the man who had fathered them. From the photos I've seen of Frank Davis, I think his son is a spitting image of him, but they're nothing alike. Irene Davis spoiled her son and created a monster. She didn't allow him to become a responsible grown adult. Frank's son, though, is a different story. It was obvious to me that he had an excellent upbringing. You see, this man at my house was a baby when his mother was murdered by Frank Davis at the Redbird Laundromat. He was sitting on the front seat. Well, he was in the front seat between his mother and his grandmother. He was later raised by his mother's parents and that family. He told me he never knew his grandmother, Irene Davis, because his maternal grandmother wouldn't allow it. I interviewed over 50 people, some of whom shared personal mementos. Bill Deaver was generous with his copyrighted crime scene photos, which are all in the book. The current owner of what had been Blacksnake Ranch had historical property documents. Government personnel on different levels gave me their records. The Garland County Library was so kind every time I asked them for a box of microfilm. Thank you, Greg. The Historical Society went an extra mile to help me gather info and photos. And a melting pot volunteer found some amazing items that I would have never found on my own. I wrote this story with well-qualified sources and was a maniac about documenting the origins of every piece of information line by line. It was so excessive that my editor drastically reduced the notes section that's in the back of my book. I can't count how many drafts I wrote. Initially, I thought the book would be about Kathy, but her story ends by page 35, and then Frank Davis takes over. I completed the manuscript in January 2020 and sent it to an agent I'd met at Killer Nashville. It's a writers' conference. She thought my story had a journalistic feel and wanted to see some more literary elements. And she told me to read in Cold Blood and 2 other books. And she said, if you decide to follow some of my suggestions, you are welcome to revise and resubmit your manuscript. I did exactly what she said, but I didn't get back with her because in the meantime, I was given the name of a New York City agent who specialized in nonfiction books. I contacted her and she wanted an agent exclusive. She also asked me to write a nonfiction book proposal that adhered to real strict guidelines. I scurried and I wrote a 50-page proposal. I was grateful for the first agent who asked for the revise, and I was more grateful for the second who sold my book to a publisher in 1 month's time. I was excited in December. Okay, that was New York. Okay, right there. Thank you. I was excited in December 2020 to sign my book contract with Rowman and Littlefield. They had chosen its Prometheus imprint to release my book, and they'd given me a March 1st, 2021 deadline to submit my manuscript. I took every minute of that time to go over all the little ticky things that needed attention in the book. One of them was contacting a friend who had been mentioned by another person in the book. And I had to ask her if I could use her name, or did she want me to use a pseudonym? And she said, oh, girl, I want my name in the book. I can't wait to read it. And most of y'all here know her. My acquisitions editor began the serious editing in April 2021. And from there, it went to the production editor. All in all, the book was edited probably 9 times, both inside and outside the publisher's domain. And each time I was in awe of what they caught. My eyes have been on those pages for so long, I was glad somebody else was catching all the problems. But even after my book comes out, I'm sure there'll be something that was missed. While my book was waiting to be printed, and it was actually just printed March 18th, I was told, an audiobook was being recorded. The Atlanta audiobook narrator had some problems with 21 names and places here in Hot Springs. My editor sent me a list and asked that I call the narrator and leave the pronunciations on her voicemail. I was here at the library one Saturday meeting with my writers group, and I happened to tell Greg, who was my go-to person here at the library, about the list, and he said, Washita. That's always a hard one. Some of the others were Lawrays, Stigler's, Schweer, Gigerich, Abear, Avenel, and Mazander. One of them was a Greek name, and I had to call a high school friend and get help on that one. I had to set the record straight when one of the editors questioned the word spa. It appeared in a Signal Record editorial. The sentence read, while Davis was loose following his escape, a number of spa residents expressed fear that he might return here and harm them. Of course, Hot Springs natives would know the term spa resident, and it's understandable that an outsider wouldn't. Our town's nickname, Spa City, had already been mentioned in the front of the book, but I guess that editor didn't catch it. My reply was, spa resident should remain as written. I had the privilege of hindsight to catch connections in Frank Davis's murders that someone during those times might not have noticed. For instance, Betty Jo Tucker was one of Kathy's best friends, and when Betty Jo married, she found out that her father-in-law had been on the jury of Frank Davis's trial. Another Betty Jo connection involved her father's cousin, who in 1966 worked for Dr. Ward. Years later, that cousin was involved in a surprising coincidence that you'll read in the book. Now this gets deep. The second victim's 15-year-old cousin attended her murder trial, and years later married the court clerk's son. The cousin was a member of my high school graduating class. Another schoolmate now owns Blacksnake Ranch. He changed the name of the property, and he completely updated the ranch and added a swimming pool. Sarah Ward chose a pallbearer for Kathy's funeral, who a few years earlier had served as a pallbearer for the murderer's stepfather. At the time, it was believed that Kathy's death was an accident, so Sarah couldn't have known the connection, but I don't think she would have regardless. The daughter of the judge who presided over Frank's murder trial would years later report on Frank Davis in the Sentinel Record. The assistant prosecuting attorney of Frank's murder trial was the father of a girl who Kathy had invited to a bunking party on Friday night, June 24th, the day she died. Frank had 5 wives, but when his third wife married him, her family lived across the street from the judge who a decade later would preside over Frank's murder trial. By that time, she had escaped Frank and left town, and her parents had moved away from the judge's neighborhood. Frank Davis not only preferred young women half his age, he also hung out with teenage boys, and the younger brother of one of them later became a deputy sheriff. There was a Bermuda Triangle of homes between the murderer, the victim, and the Redbird laundromat owner that you'll read in the book. Now, I have some I wishes. I wish people's memories hadn't faded since the 60s. A few of them who were directly involved with Kathy's case couldn't remember a thing. And then others who said they did remember had a completely different story than what was reported in the newspaper. One of them even told me that she knew that Kathy Ward had been missing for days out at the ranch. She said, I knew that because I read it in the paper, but research proved that wrong. I wish several people I interviewed were still alive today to read the book. They are Francis Forsberg, Debbie Fager Larson, Gary Jackson, Boyd Heath, Walter Wright, and Dr. Ward. I wish Kathy's mother hadn't passed away a year before I started working on the book. I wish a few people would have granted me an interview, but I understand they were traumatized by the murders and it would be too painful for them to dredge up the memories. I had to give them pseudonyms because they were part of the storyline. And several of you all will know who they are when you read the book. I wish I could have seen grand jury evidence that substantiated Frank Davis's murder charge for Kathy Ward. The Garland County Circuit Court gave me everything they had on Frank Davis's murders except that one file. I think fate dictated the cover of my book. As a preemie twin, I spent the first 6 weeks of my life downtown in the nursery at St. Joseph's Hospital. And I'm sure the nurses rocked me every night while the Southern Club was rocking down the street. A few years later, our mother and big sister took us for a stroll downtown where a Stone Stoppers photographer took this photo of us not far from the Southern Club. I remember as a kid sitting in the back seat of the car while our parents drove downtown, and Daddy, every time we got to the Southern Club, Daddy would go to the sign with the can girl, and he'd say, If her legs are kicking, that means the coast is clear. I'm sure y'all know that too. Yeah. I finally walked through the front doors of the Southern Club when I was around 10 years old. Mother and Daddy took Mitzi and me to see their movie star friend, Gail Robbins, who was singing at the early dinner show, the Downstairs Bar and Grill. Decades earlier, Gail sung with the swing band and some orchestras before a talent scout discovered her. She became Betty Grable's understudy at 20th Century Fox and met my parents on a movie hiatus. They were in Hays, Kansas, where Daddy was working in a World War II defense plant with Gail's fiance. In the mid-50s, my parents went out to Hollywood for our big sister to appear on Place the Face with Gail, but that's another story. Then in the early 60s, Gail came to Hot Springs to perform at the Southern Club stage shows. The newspaper took this photo of Gail with my parents one year. I truly believe that years ago, when Daddy was pointing at that Southern Club sign, he was really saying, someday you'll write a book about Hot Springs and that'll be the cover. Snake Eyes is like a Hollywood script. It has lots of twists and turns, some bombshells, and an ending no one expects. If it hadn't been for an email I received, I would have known Publishers Weekly had reviewed my book last December. They gave it a nice review, and the same day, it prompted a Hollywood producer to inquire about film rights the day that it came out in the magazine. But I'll place that in file 13 along with the foreign publisher who was hot after my book, where American true crime stories are really hot in that country. I'll be giving an encore presentation at the Historical Society meeting in April, and I'll only be giving this same in-depth program one more time after the Historical Society, and that'll be on May 25th, the library's Author Talk series. Prometheus Books is releasing my hardcover book on May 15th, supposedly. You can pre-order it at Books A Million, Hot Springs, or online at any of these major bookstores. Now, I want to thank you all for coming tonight, and I want to invite you all to my book signing on Sunday, May 22nd, 2:30, down at the Central Theater. I chose that location because it's right around the corner from Central Junior High School, where we attended school with Kathy in 1966. It's very special, and I'm going to have a program, a special event. It's going to be a long program like this. It's a special event, and it may be a little bit emotional. Once again, I have to say that I couldn't have written this book without all of the help from everyone who's listed in the back of the book and acknowledgments, and a lot of the people here are in there. I can point them out right now. And I want to thank you all so much. I want to thank you for coming tonight. Thank you so much.
As far as book talks go, I think Biddy gave an A+ job, so congratulations, Biddy. And as far as managing slideshows go, I'm going to give myself a D+. Okay, a D, I'll take it. Okay. Did anyone fill out their question cards? Or were you too mesmerized by that presentation? We're going to collect those question cards, and I'll give you a moment to write your questions on those. And also get your blue tickets out. Did everybody get a ticket when you walked in? Did everybody keep their ticket and not drop it? Okay, we're gonna give out 5 copies of the book. Does everybody have their tickets out? Does anybody need a ticket? Can we bring a ticket up here for Mr. Beard? I'm going to read off the last 3 numbers of the ticket because otherwise they should all start the same. Okay, our first winner is 879. 879. That's you. All right.
All right.
889.
All right.
882.
All right.
919. They're all bundled back in the back. Let's have someone get wrong with. All right, last copy. 8. 8. 8. All right, congratulations. You each win. Oh, here it is. You will. You'll each get a voucher, and so we want you to fill out your name and phone number, and we're going to contact you. Hopefully, they'll be available on release date or shortly after. You'll get 3 copies of the Snake Eyes. Okay, so we're gonna. Biddy, I'll have you back up here. I'm gonna read off some audience questions.
I was kind of hoping that we could maybe get like a class photo, get everybody up here and get a photo back in. Would that be possible? Would y'all mind doing that? Y'all, what?
You need to stand in the front there and take a picture like this one.
Oh, that's a good thought. That's a good thought. Donna, is this my phone? It is. Okay. So y'all can't leave because I want to get a picture of everyone here. And has everybody signed the book in the back, please? Thank you. And Patsy's looking at her watch, so. Yeah, okay.
All right. What were your favorite and least favorite parts of this writing process?
Oh, I love the research. I love research. That's my most favorite thing to do. Righty Lane, where's he Lane? Yes, we love research. The worst thing I hated was transcribing interviews. I hate that.
When did you discover your love for writing?
I don't know that I ever discovered my love for writing. I think I discovered my love for reading in the 3rd grade when I won the a contest in Ms. Dugan's class for reading the most books.
Yeah.
So there.
During the summer.
Yes.
When did you decide that you needed to write this book?
In 2014, when Leslie told me that secret and we put two and two together and that mysterious event happened, that's what prompted me to start digging up the story. You'll read about it in the book.
Has anyone else filled out their cards yet? All right.
Okay, let me get a phone. I want to get a picture of everybody.
Does anyone else have a question?
Well, I want you to take on the line, will you, please? Okay, Paul,
We're
can you get?
gonna take a picture.
We just want to get a picture before all of y'all take off, okay, please? Can you sit, get up there on there, please? Green lady, please. Can you get everybody? Okay, tell us.
Do both sides, Biddy.
Okay, I'm gonna get this side and then I'm gonna get the other side. How about that? Okay, 1, 2, 3.
Thank you. Now, get the other side, please. Take several, please.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. Look at me, look at me, look at me, look at me.
Okay, sweep the room. Sweep, come on through and listen, please. Thank you so much.
Does that sound good?
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
All right, so since everyone was shy on filling out the cards, if you have any audience questions, we'll get in a few of those. Mr. Beard.
Mr. Beard has a question.
Just did Kathy maybe have a black mother and white father?
No. No, sir.
No further questions. I was checking out her cheekbones, cheeks here look like mine.
She and her mother were beautiful, and her father looked like Gregory Peck,
Thank you.
and they were all brilliant. Yes, ma'am.
I was curious, and you may not be able to answer this, it may be in the book, but you said that she was buried within 24 hours.
Yes, ma'am.
That wasn't time for an autopsy, was it?
No, but she was so badly mangled that, I mean, they put her in a casket and,
Well, Tom Lott gave him the crystals.
well,
It's in the book.
it's. But there were, and see, her father was a doctor, and he wanted to see her body, and he got up here, he drove up from Murfreesboro, and the mortuary wouldn't give him the doctor's privileges. He wanted to see his daughter there in the mortuary, and they wouldn't allow him to see her.
It was a bad step.
That,
You can't be my daddy.
I know, it was gruesome. She was dragged across, well, I don't want to go into it, you'll read about it. Yeah, and
Where was that?
Gross, she was at Gross Mortuary. Right down the street from Central and the high school. What now?
Jerry White. He's still alive.
Jerry White.
It's Karen McDade's ex-husband.
Wish I'd known that. He worked there back in '66? And was he there in '66? Well, I talked to Charles Brenner, he couldn't remember a thing. Any other questions? Well, I want to thank all of you all for coming, and I hope to see you all at my book signing May 22nd.
Thank you, everyone. One day at the Hot Springs Book Festival. Be sure and check it out tomorrow, including Miss Elizabeth. So,
But I stole this one. But the reason is that this is my niece. She was here. Yeah.